I replaced my sister and married her fiancé, who suddenly became blind. After marriage, we got along very well. He always thought that my sister was the one accompanying him, and therefore treated me with delicacy and tenderness, deep and affectionate. If everything had gone smoothly, this lifetime should have been a smooth sailing journey and passed by quietly. Until one day, the man who was supposed to be blind for a lifetime suddenly regained his sight. The first time I saw William was at a private nursing home. The luxurious hospital room was about 100 square meters, with no scent of typical hospital antiseptics, only a trace of high-quality sandalwood fragrance. However, what filled the room was the mismatched, intense, and tumultuous symphony. It made one feel as if they were in the surging waves of wind and waves, with even the heart beating rapidly. In the corner of the ward, a man sat under the window, dressed in loose striped patient clothes, his eyes lowered, submerged in the dim shadows of his eyelashes, as cold as ice, yet transparent like water. The music was deafening, making the physician who brought me in have to bend down and speak by the fair ear. The man in front of me somehow found a remote control from somewhere, pressed it casually. The room full of noise suddenly fell silent. A melodious yet flat voice emanated from his pale lips. Celine was the name of my broken-off engagement sister. I vaguely hummed in response. William's family reluctantly agreed for me to marry him, but at the same time, they set a condition, which was to directly come over and get married under the identity of Celine, to avoid hurting William's fragile heart. After all, he and my sister had only met twice, so what did it matter if it was her in person? At that moment, I straightforwardly said, "Hello, let's get married." I was lying on the bed browsing my phone when suddenly I heard a dull thud coming from the wall. It sounded like something had fallen to the ground. "William?" I called out, but there was no response from the next room. A sense of foreboding crept over me, so I pushed open the master bedroom door whilst hearing the constant sound of running water from the bathroom. Inside, I heard a stifled groan from the person behind the door. "I'm fine. What about you?" There was no reply from the other side. I cautiously knocked on the door. "Don't worry, I won't look if it's not convenient for you." After a while, I heard a low grunt from William behind the door. With his permission, I entered, and saw him sitting by the edge of the bathtub, a slight blood stain on his forehead, his shirt completely soaked and sticking transparently to his body, with wet shorts on as well. I glanced quickly, then averted my eyes, helping him up from the floor. "I spilled the shower gel," he murmured absent-mindedly, treading on the slippery tiles. Only then did I understand how he got the injury on his forehead. "Any other injuries?" I asked with a measured concern. William quickly brushed off, "I'm fine, thank you." But through the semi-transparent fabric on his shoulders, I still saw a big red bruise on his back. "Your back is injured too." "Let me take a look," I offered. "No need, really," he insisted. He was being too stubborn, which made me a bit impatient. I pressed his shoulders with both hands firmly. "Listen to me. If your arm is also severely injured, it will affect your use of crutches." Maybe my assertiveness worked, for William surprisingly stayed still, letting me gently peel off his soaked shirt, revealing his swollen right shoulder and arm from the fall. Without hesitating, I went downstairs to get the first aid kit, applying some Chinese medicine oil with a heated cotton swab on the injuries and giving a simple massage. During the process, the warm breath kept spraying on his neck and back. Even though he was a man, the position made William's fair complexion blush with a hint of embarrassment and desire. As if someone had adorned him with a light coat of blush from the corner of his eyes to his temples, with a faint sense of shame, he tried to make a small talk. "Celine, have you, studied nursing? Call me Floria." "Floria, your technique seems quite skilled," I laughed. "I used to do it for my mom when she occasionally overworked herself and strained her muscles." "Overworked?" He responded with a subtle inquiry, which made me realize my mistake, so I quickly covered up. "Oh, you know, people who work in offices tend to have muscle strain issues." William did not press further, sitting quietly in the bathtub, enduring my care. As I finished the massage, sweating all over, he thanked me softly before I left. I must say, this new son-in-law of the Johnsons was peculiar in a charming way, as I surprisingly found myself in a good mood after a day of fuss. Even the humiliation of the forced marriage had dissipated. The night passed dreamlessly. The next morning, when I woke up, I found that he had already gone downstairs, quietly listening to the financial morning news in the living room at a very low volume. I called out a greeting, and his eyes immediately turned towards me, showing a questioning look, almost confusing me. Can you see me?" "Just a faint outline." As I went downstairs, the man took my hand and led me to stand by the window facing the sunlight. "As long as you stand in the light, I can see your silhouette." So, you're not completely invisible either? He didn't speak, but gently pulled multiple layers of sheer curtains over my eyes. In my world, it's more like seeing through a blurry curtain that blocks the details. How does it feel? Behind the blurry veil, William was smiling at me, his lips curled with a smile. I was about to find words to describe it when the front door suddenly opened. Outside stood my father in a suit and my sister in a Chanel suit, with some relatives of the Whites behind them. The scene of the two dear people standing together left everyone in astonishment. I quickly pushed William aside. Dad, what are you doing here? Mom has arranged for a return banquet. We're here to take you back for the feast. Now, hearing the hesitation in my tone, my little sister smiled faintly. Yes, it's the third day of the return to the family. Didn't you know? Sis? Of course, I didn't. After all, your birth mother informed everyone except the main protagonist. Before I could retort, William had turned his gaze towards my sister, his eyes calm and deep. Who are you? Celine was stunned. Me? I am her sister. Oh, I haven't heard about you. William replied indifferently, but then held my hand. But your voices are quite similar. My sister felt a bit awkward. Oh, really? Although my wife's voice is more pleasant. After a busy half hour, we got into the Johnsons' Lincoln Stretch limousine and headed to the villa in another part of the city, with Celine sitting directly in the front passenger seat. On the day of the daughter's return to her family, it was customary for her to spend the night at her maternal home. No matter how much she mistreated me, my stepmother wouldn't mistreat William, even setting up a spacious south-facing guest room for us, the newlyweds, to spend the night. Late at night, I prepared the bed for William, but he lay there with misty eyes, looking at me. Floria? Do you think I'm pitiful? Why would you say that? He sighed dejectedly. My parents died early, and it was my grandfather who raised me. Since I lost my sight, several uncles made various pressures to make me give up the CEO position. Maybe I have exhausted all my luck in this lifetime. I might mock others, but I am terrible at comforting people. After a long pause, I managed only 2 words. Don't say that. Clearly, William wasn't comforted at all. He rolled up in the blanket, turned to the side, and sighed softly, leaving me feeling a bit guilty. Actually, you're not the most pitiful one. I have a friend, I began. I remembered somewhere that when you don't know how to comfort someone, tell them a more miserable story, and they'll naturally feel less miserable. So I sat on the edge of the bed and continued. Let's say my friend's father hooked up with a rich woman in town, who couldn't bear it, so she committed suicide by drinking poison. She had to live with her father, surviving under the cruel stepmother. Do you know a stepmother? It's that kind of person who is outwardly kind but venomous behind doors. She was just like that to my friend, seemingly friendly but withholding even a piece of meat from her. As I spoke, my eyes slightly dampened. Besides, because of the stepmother's own daughter, she could never stand out and had to be discreet, so that everyone would praise the other child. So, having a mother is different from being motherless, like a weed. It had been a while since someone loved me, so I had forgotten how it felt to be loved. Tears unexpectedly slid from my eyes, and as I discreetly wiped them away, I cleared my throat. Hey, William, are you still listening? There was no response from the bed. When I checked, he had closed his eyes, breathing evenly. He had fallen asleep unnoticed. Truly, there is no genuine empathy in this world. The next morning, I stepped out of the room and saw my father standing near the small garden gate, gesturing me over secretly. As I walked closer, he discreetly slipped a card into my hand. There's 100,000 yuan in there, take it as your dowry. My father, once a well-known handsome man in the village, was now in his 50s, looking as handsome and sophisticated as ever, a definite demeanor of an upper-class person. As I took the money, my heart remained unaffected. Thank you, Dad. My dad just gave me some money, but the next moment he hesitated. How about this, you leave your dowry with me and I'll keep it for you. It's just a small sum of money, barely enough for the Johnsons to go on a trip, and he has to hide it, afraid of giving my stepmother a handle to hold over him. I've been used to this for many years, no need, I'll take it myself. He seemed to want to say something more, looking embarrassed and hesitant. I waved my hand and walked towards the deep end of the garden. My stepmother was in her silk morning gown, taking care of her precious orchids, not far away. Seeing me walking towards her with a plain face, she was in a good mood. Good morning, Floria. I was a bit annoyed. Aunt, when are you going to fulfill the promise you made to me earlier? It's not urgent. What do you mean it's not urgent? My stepmother put down the watering can, with a subtle smile. Floria, you're already married, how can a grown-up girl like you not have any schemes? Before that, you have to promise me that you will stay with the Whites for a long time. How long do you want me to stay? Before my stepmother could speak, Celine walked over from the other side of the garden. Sister, William treats you so well, and yet you still want to leave? Seeing them both enjoying the commotion, I felt uncomfortable. Do I want to leave or not? What's it got to do with you? She smiled and said, but brother-in-law is really good. He is handsome, has a good character, doesn't look like a blind man at all. What could you be unsatisfied with? Are you satisfied then? I raised an eyebrow. Why don't we switch now? At the words, a hint of embarrassment flashed across the other's face. I'm not saying that. I couldn't be bothered to argue with them. I coldly surveyed the mother and daughter in front of me. In any case, no more than 3 months. I'll be waiting for you. With that, I turned and walked away, but the next moment, a familiar figure was standing on the veranda. What 3 months? I was caught off guard by the question. Luckily, the other didn't press on, but instead reached out to hold my hand. Accompany me to work, okay? Work? The other hugged me affectionately, completely ignoring the mother and daughter who were like a backdrop. I haven't been to the office in 3 months. I have a meeting today. I need to prepare documents. I'll need your help. Seeing the two of them looking equally displeased, a secret sense of happiness suddenly welled up in my heart. Okay. An hour later, William took me to the top floor of the Whites Group building. It was an open conference room, and the secretary in high heels settled us at the head of the conference table, softly inquiring, Mr. William, who is this? Under the table, William held my hand, looking quite pleased. She is my eyes. The secretary glanced at me, brought 2 cups of hot coffee with a strong aroma. I touched it and almost spilled it. It's too hot, isn't it? I glanced at the secretary, who remained composed, and pushed the 2 cups of coffee further away. Time passed by, 1 minute at a time. William raised his wrist and then reflexively put it down again. I quickly said, it's almost 2 o'clock. Is everyone here? Despite having notified the meeting in advance and requested all department managers and directors to attend the meeting for a unified performance review, the conference room at the moment had only a few people. The secretary's tone was indifferent. Not yet. After a while, William nodded. He didn't seem anxious at all, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. Floria, can you help me draft an email and send it to the work group? Now? Yes, now. I didn't know what he was thinking, so I took the laptop in front of me and started typing. Dear colleagues, due to my visual impairment, I had a breakthrough last month after consulting with the hospital, and there has been significant progress. I was shocked as I typed. Is it true? Keep going. Consider the fact that the cause of the disease is a lesion in the visual area. I have already scheduled surgery recently, with an 85% chance of regaining my eyesight. At that time, there will be significant personnel changes in the company. Please be informed. After finishing my message, the man in front of me picked up the cup on the table and drank it in one gulp. Even though the coffee was still too hot. But he gulped it down without even wrinkling his brow. He was a tough guy. Looking around, not only was the secretary's face pale, but the others in the meeting room were also looking at each other, hesitant to speak. William then announced that the meeting had begun. One by one, the senior executives took the stage for their speeches, and the atmosphere was very tense. Obviously, these people have not completely undermined his confidence. In no time, several middle-aged men and women sneaked into the conference room, and I even saw his uncle among them. William didn't mind. Starting now, record the time each director and senior executive arrives. You can also go to the finance department for handover. I must say, I was shocked by the ruthless side of William that he showed. I thought he was a wolf, but as soon as he left the office building, he suddenly collapsed on my shoulder. I feel a bit dizzy. Using discomfort as an excuse, he almost pressed half of his weight on me, resting his beautiful face on my shoulder, looking somewhat weak. I touched his cheek. So, should we go home now? No. The man on my shoulder struggled slightly, his tone a bit stubborn. They didn't use the bridal chamber I designated, and I don't like it. Then, should we go to my place? William never refused me, and this time was no exception. So, I brought him to my small rental house. It was very narrow, and as soon as we entered, he bumped into a cabinet. Did you hurt yourself? Seeing the other in pain and losing control of his expression, I quickly pretended to hit the cabinet. It's all because of this lousy cabinet. Bad cabinet. Bad cabinet. Just like my mom used to do to me whenever I bumped into something when I was a child. Unexpectedly, the man in front of me stopped. The next moment, he suddenly extended his arm and hugged me tightly. He hugged me so tightly that I couldn't even catch my breath, feeling self-reproach, embarrassment, and despair creeping to the extreme. Promise me, don't leave, okay? At first, I didn't understand what he meant until he repeated it several times. Only then did I realize he was asking me not to divorce him. I hesitated. Being with him for a lifetime like this also seemed nice. But the overwhelming sense of guilt in my heart made it impossible for me to give a definite answer. But he thought I was rejecting him, his rose-colored lips moving as if containing the morning dew. I'll undergo surgery for you. Please don't leave me, okay? Facing his reddened and misty eyes, I swallowed hard. What surgery? Just that minimally invasive surgery. I thought you made that up. How could I make that up? William lifted my hand, gently pressing his hot cheek against it. I had a CT scan some time ago, and the tumor has already shrunk. The doctor said there's an 85% chance of regaining my eyesight. Is that true? At his words, I couldn't tell if I was surprised or happy. I forced a smile. That's great. When are you going to have the surgery? I'm still thinking about it. Because the cyst is close to the brain vessels, the clinical risk is very high. His tone was casual, but the words were quite scary. If the doctor sneezes, you might end up a widow. Never mind, let's not do it then. How can we not? William said, teasing me, just think, if I die, you might end up with more. Hearing him say that, I felt a bit uneasy. I'm not after money, I just like blind men. You're really silly. He teased me again, and inadvertently touched my wet eyes. The two of us suddenly fell silent. As night fell, I gave the only small bed to William, and planned to sleep on the couch for the night, but he grabbed me. What about you? I'll sleep in the other bed. Who knew the other didn't say a word, limping to the living room with a cane. You lied to me, there's no second bed here. Just as I was about to shake him off me, he suddenly clutched his chest, his eyes reddened, breathing heavily. I'm sick, so sick, and you don't care about me? His voice was hoarse, and his expression was disoriented. I was stunned, and he gently pressed me down between the blankets and pillows. Join me, let's sleep together. I had never seen the other so affectionate, and I lay down awkwardly and stiffly. The man suddenly bit my earlobe lightly. Floria, was that friend you mentioned that day, you, wasn't it? At his words, a chill ran down my spine, and I broke out in cold sweat. That day? But you fell asleep that day, didn't you? I replied with a trembling heart, and the other just chuckled and didn't continue the topic. In a subtle and teasing manner, William quickly tired, burying his head on my chest and murmuring softly, Floria, why are you so good? I didn't understand what was so good about me, deserving of such a satisfied evaluation from him. But receiving such praise, I, in a daze, even had a sense of happiness that could be a kind of tacit understanding. In the days that followed, we didn't mention the surgery anymore, but we grew closer. On normal days, I would help him bathe, dress, prepare his daily clothes, and do many things that a wife would do. William occasionally went to the office, but more of his time was spent in the kitchen with his cane, coming out with a pot of strange-tasting soup for me. He was always that domesticated person. His pale face and wrist, dressed in dark long clothes, made him look like a piece of beautiful jade. And although I was already used to it, I would still be touched by his presence in the kitchen, sitting on the couch, or walking in the bedroom. As long as he was by my side, I would feel a faint joy. In this joy, there was also hidden fear. This was already a beautiful dream. And I was cautiously dreaming, like a thief stealing a shining pearl in the night. The days passed by quite smoothly. Several weeks later, William bid me farewell on a clear morning. I was happy for him in my heart, but couldn't help sighing deeply as he embraced me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Soon I will be able to see you for real. At his words, I forced a smile and said, didn't we meet twice before we got engaged? Actually, it was more than that. He said softly, when you were a child, I also saw you once. You were wearing a princess dress, a very cute little girl. Is that so? I smiled on the surface, but bitterness rose in my heart. I knew he was talking about my sister. Feeling dispirited, I changed the subject. When are you leaving? Later, William said coolly, his cool fingers exploring my face, but first, let me take you to a place. After that, he took me to a jewelry exhibition hall, which covered an area of over 2,000 square meters, the largest auction-style club in the city. I stored some things here. As we chatted, a staff member took out a velvet tray from one of the multiple secure safes in the storage room, filled with dazzling and transparent colored gems, emitting a pure glow even in the dim light. He picked up the tray and placed the colored gems around my chest, saying, "This is a collection I have been putting together for years, with a total value exceeding 8 figures." Given that the Whites made their fortune in jewelry, this extravagance was quite normal, but wearing a villa around your neck might be a bit excessive, isn't it? With a graceful smile on his lips, he teased, "So, what kind of necklace do you want?" Surprised, I asked, "For me?" He tilted his head and said, with a mix of tenderness and certainty, "Of course, we've been married for so long, and I haven't given you a decent gift yet. Besides, this was originally prepared for my future wife." Looking down at the slender fingers that were arranging the necklace for me, I felt unworthy to marry such a wonderful person. And the day he regained his sight would also be the end for us, like returning borrowed time. Mixed emotions churned within me. There was a moment when I even wished he could stay blind. Sensing my emotions, William suddenly hugged me from behind, saying, "Floria, if you're really scared, I can skip the surgery." At that moment, I thought about many things. In the end, I whispered, "Go ahead. Take back your life, don't be like me." As he embraced me, the man lightly kissed my cheek and draped the string of colored gems around my neck, leading me to stand under the bright spot of light. "Please stand in the light," he said. He stood in the dim corner afterward, silently admiring for a long time. Truly beautiful. William wanted to invite me to leave with him, but I refused. I wanted to wait for him to open his eyes. If he realized I wasn't Celine, I might just bleed out on the operating table, so I promised that once he got off the plane, I would go pick him up at the airport. There were also a few people he trusted accompanying him for the surgery, so I didn't have to worry too much. On the first day abroad, William called me for a long transoceanic call. According to his companions, the surgery was successful, but he still needed to be observed in a sterile room for several hours. They asked me not to rush. Finally, a week later, I received a call asking me to go to the airport to pick someone up. It's hard to describe how I felt at that moment. It was like there was a little bird in my chest. It was like I was the little bird. Even when I received a call from my stepmother, I didn't feel angry. I even felt a bit warm and familiar. On the call, she said everything had been arranged, and asked me to go to the airport lobby to get something she promised me: my mother's ashes. Before dying, my mother's last wish was not to be placed in the ancestral tomb at home. But my grandmother said it would affect the feng shui and insisted her tomb remained there until today. Although I didn't understand why she was at the same airport, I couldn't suppress the excitement in my heart and hurriedly dressed up, grabbed my bag, and headed to the airport. The White's assistant gave me the flight schedule, and I hurriedly arrived at the lobby, only to see a familiar young man, surrounded by a group of people, walking briskly towards me from the gate. The next second, his gaze swept over. Like a beam of light illuminating a white magnolia, clear and noble. However, before I could speak, my stepmother stopped me not far away, holding a half-foot square box in her hand, blocking me with the words, "Don't go. Your sister has already gone to pick him up." The Johnsons are unfathomable. It's hard to imagine. I was shocked and angry. "No. I want to go." "Don't make a scene." My stepmother handed me the small box in her hand impatiently. "These are your mother's ashes. I spent a great deal to redeem them from the ancestral hall of your hometown. Decide for yourself, is the man more important, or your mother?" What kind of a choice was this? Unknowingly, tears streamed down my face. How can you do this to me? What did I do? Weren't these your own choices? My stepmother poked at my heart, word by word. "Moreover, what status did you use to introduce yourself to him? Saying you married him under false pretenses? Or did you hijack your sister's fate for your mother's sake?" With no words to respond, I felt heartbroken. As the man in the middle, surrounded by people, approached, there was also a beautiful and elegant young lady accompanying him. They were so beautiful and well-matched in appearance, education, and background, which was worlds apart from me. I didn't know what to say. The scene before me quickly blurred, and in the extremely blurred background, William, who had been sitting in the chair, had already left without a word. Thief, robber, and swindler. These were the nicknames the housemaids used to call me in private. When I was a child, it was just picking up the beef Celine left on the table or secretly touching her branded princess dress. They would whisper that I was stealing, thinking I couldn't hear them. They even reported to my stepmother in secret. Little did they know, a child's hearing was the sharpest. I was already 25. My mother didn't love me because the man didn't love her. So she abandoned me. My father didn't love me either. He only loved the woman who could provide him with a luxurious upper social life and their delicate and selfish little daughter. As for me, I was never chosen, not even once. Except for now, this moment. William was so close, quietly watching me wipe away my tears. His fingers moved slightly but didn't show more. I cried for a while, feeling meaningless to cry alone. We sat face to face, feeling somewhat estranged and restrained, until I spoke first. Have your eyes not been healed? Don't you know that the condition can fluctuate? Holding the coffee cup, he spoke calmly. Maybe today you're blind, tomorrow you're fine, who knows? After a moment of silence, I asked softly, what about Celine and the others? The man's face darkened at the mention of that name. Seeing his reluctance to discuss it, I didn't press further. I opened the small refrigerator in the living room and found some frozen dumpling filling inside, which made me a bit happy. It's almost lunchtime. Should I make dumplings for you? Okay, he replied. As I began defrosting the hard filling, with the windows open for ventilation and facing a full-length mirror, I looked down while making the dumplings. When I glanced up unintentionally, I saw William, who had been sitting in the chair, now standing behind me. In the sunlight, the man reached out with his slender fingers, secretly touching my fluttering hair. I immediately turned around, unintentionally coating William with flour. You're not blind. But before I could finish my sentence, he firmly held my face and kissed me without hesitation. It was my first kiss. After the kiss, I was left bewildered by the rush of emotions. You tricked me. You tricked me too? William smiled, his long fingers sliding over my lips, silent and ambiguous. Weary even now. How could you? The next moment, William suddenly embraced me, his nose wandering on my face. I can't do this, but what about your deception and disappearance? Floria, don't forget the sin you committed against me. Unconsciously, he pressed me onto the couch, and another kiss was about to burst out, like squeezing a ripe orange. One touch and the alluring juice would flow out. As I tried to defend myself, I was relentlessly squeezed by him. This relentless judgment could have been a bit more holy. It wasn't until I shook my head in resistance that William stopped, one hand supporting himself above me, basking in the warm winter sunlight, his skin seemingly glowing. Tell me, what is your true reason for marrying me? Fearful that he might continue, I cautiously explained the whole situation. So, it's to move the tomb for your mother? He chuckled after a long while. Well, at least it's not for someone else. Hesitantly, I asked, have you forgiven me now? The man looked at me for a moment before calmly saying, not yet. From now on, I will ensure you fulfill all the duties of a wife. One by one did he seem to enjoy playing this game. He asked me to patiently lead him as before, take care of him intimately, even so meticulously as to bathe him, holding my once snow-white towel, wiping his jade-like skin. And as I wiped him, I would be caught off guard and pulled into the water by him. I had never heard any symphony more spectacular than life's trials and tribulations. And this night of charm and passion was enough to make my throat quiver, almost drowning in it. Life was desolate, and beautiful dreams were hard to find. Nobody knew that two people abandoned by the whole world were tightly intertwined on this night. A few days later, William and I went to get our marriage certificate. There were no flowers, no suits, and no friends or relatives present. He had booked a top-floor table at the best hotel for us to enjoy a quiet and pleasant candlelit dinner, accompanied by the soothing sound of Debussy's Clair de Lune, marking the beginning of another beautiful chapter. After dinner, we didn't go back to that villa, but moved to another honeymoon suite. It was a spacious flat that he had originally chosen, suitable for a family of 4, without being too spacious or cramped. I found that I really liked his choice. Once we started living together, everything felt harmonious like before. Although he was busy lately, he still made time to come home and have meals and take walks with me. During his leisure time, I would occasionally visit his company and accompany him in the office. The previous secretary was no longer there, replaced by a few young assistants, all of whom were friendly and careful in their attitudes. However, I overheard their whispered discussions. They were saying that William had been conducting layoffs and business reorganizations, cutting more than 30% of the bad assets, including some senior executives and departments with long tenure. He was described as ruthless and iron-handed. Upon hearing me recount these people's gossip to him, William gently stroked my back and seemed pleased. Yes, I am a ruthless person. Take your situation, for example. There are surveillance cameras around here. If I didn't know that you had come to see me in secret, I wouldn't have let you off so easily. His words made me feel uneasy, and I instinctively swallowed my saliva. What would you do then? His response was a gentlemanly smile, with a deep look in his eyes. Forgiveness wouldn't be a light matter, but a serious one. He was such an elegant person, I must have misunderstood him. 3 months into our marriage, the Johnsons were suddenly exposed by the mainstream media for a bribery scandal, causing their stocks to plummet by 20 points. This incident had nothing to do with me, but my father started calling me again. Regardless of whether I answered or not, he kept calling me with different numbers every day, showing great persistence. Seeing me ignore his calls several times, William calmly responded, "Just answer it, what are you afraid of?" I hesitated. Everyone could see that he wasn't calling me, he was clearly calling him, so, if I answer, will it not involve you? The other person smiled slightly. I had already made it clear earlier, it's about breaking up. Sometimes getting out of a relationship early might not be a bad thing. If a man steals a glance at me and starts doodling on the paper, who knows when she'll turn around and bite me back? After nodding, William set down his pen and brought a pot of soup from the kitchen with a smirk. "Here, have some. I simmered it all night for you." For some reason, even though his eyes had healed, the soup he made was still so unappetizing. I took a sip, and my eyes welled up. It even reminded me of the time when I, out of curiosity, tried some beef from abroad as a child. Back then, the Johnsons weren't as wealthy as they are now. My stepmother had brought the beef from abroad, but my stepsister, Celine, had a small appetite and barely touched the beef, which was left uneaten and eventually fed to the dog after 2 days of spoilage. Since then, I had never sat at the table with them again. Seeing my eyes turn red from drinking the soup, William looked at me oddly and said, "Are you homesick?" I shook my head, but he insisted, "Listen to me, go home for a visit." As he said that, he reached out and gently touched my head. "I don't want them to keep bothering you. It's better to end things." After much deliberation, I answered my father's call, and he was overjoyed. In the afternoon, the Johnsons personally sent a car to pick me up, organizing a small family banquet in a grand manner. As I entered the living room, I saw my stepmother and stepsister seated at the head of the table, and I suddenly felt hesitant. Upon seeing this, William patted the seat next to him and gestured, "Come over, sit next to me." But as soon as I sat down, my stepmother knocked over a glass. Seeing everyone inexplicably staring at her, she awkwardly smiled and said, "It slipped." The table was filled with delicious dishes, but everyone had different thoughts on their minds, as no one even touched their chopsticks. William picked up a bowl of shrimp and peeled them himself, quickly filling a whole bowl. My father sighed and said, "William, you know about the situation. Let's eat first." William shook his head. "Let's finish eating first before discussing anything." With his casual rejection, my father was at a loss, as he looked at my stepmother who, despite always looking radiant, now seemed a bit tired. "William, you know that the Johnsons are under a lot of PR pressure lately. Their stocks even hit the limit down yesterday. No matter what, you are my son-in-law, so why must you bring up breaking up at this time and make everyone's lives difficult? Is that so?" William handed me a bowl filled with shrimp and grinned, "Celine and Floria, they are both your daughters, so why treat them differently?" My stepmother was taken aback. Seeing this, my stepsister suddenly stood up, her eyes red with tears as her voice trembled. "This isn't my mother's fault. I already apologized to you before, saying that I don't mind you being blind. Why do you still have to pursue my sister?" As she spoke, I was stunned. Could it be that the one initiating the breakup was William? Faced with the accusation, he remained indifferent. "I didn't have to break things off initially. But you all deceived me, proposed a divorce, and finally forced away the person I love. Isn't that too much?" Although his voice was gentle, it carried a weight of authority. My father murmured something but didn't say anything significant, while my stepmother looked at me coldly, saying, "Playing hard to get, this was all Floria's idea. Since she was a child, she's always coveted her sister's things." In response, I lifted my head, which had been silent all along, and said, "Aunt, you've completely twisted the truth. Are you picking on me because I don't have a mother?" "A mother?" My stepmother coldly replied, "Then you should ask her why she left her child unattended to go take pills." The atmosphere immediately tensed up. My father tried to mediate, "William, even if you marry someone else, you are still a Johnson's son-in-law. Your mother has had some financial issues recently, needing a guarantor." We are all family, so please help out. William turned to me and asked, should I act as a guarantor? Do you agree? Seeing my stepmother losing her composure, he said, asking for help, why should I ask her? She is my wife, so it's only natural to ask for her opinion. He spread his hands, implying that my support would depend on her forgiveness. As soon as he finished speaking, I rubbed my eyes and felt tears welling up. Seeing this, my stepmother thought I was crying and sneered, every time something happens, you put on a pitiful look. There's no need to look, he's not your father. I threw the napkin from my lap onto the table, saying coldly, a man who abandons his wife and daughter for his own enjoyment isn't worthy of being my father. I had never spoken harshly like this before, leaving everyone speechless. William nodded, then, that's a refusal. Floria. As we walked away hand in hand, my father called out anxiously, what do you mean he's not your father? Didn't I raise you? How can you be so heartless? Yes, I am heartless. I said coldly, and the $100,000 you gave me were used to move my mother's grave. You can consider it as if we had never existed as mother and daughter. Floria. I was too tired to argue with him. So I just pulled the person next to me, saying, I won't give you any more chances to abandon me. This time, I'm the one leaving you. As we reached the garden exit, Celine caught up to us, calling out, William, William. Not sure what she had left to say, I held on to the person next to me. What's wrong? She bowed repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted to apologize to you all. Seeing our lack of response, she trembled as she apologized. No matter what, I still hope that, based on our childhood friendship, you can help the Johnsons get through this difficult time. At her words, I looked at the silent man beside me. Seeing that he didn't immediately refuse, Celine spoke softly. Do you remember when we were young and danced at the ball? You invited me to dance while I wore a purple princess dress. When I was a child, I used to wear princess dresses. The memories he mentioned were actually true. I suddenly remembered that when we first arrived at the Johnsons, my dad tried to be a good father by buying identical princess dresses for both me and Celine, except for the color. However, my stepmother didn't like me being too flashy, and it eventually led to Celine crying and insisting on taking both dresses, leaving me with none. Thinking about this, I pinched William's palm, and he immediately looked down at me. So, what color dress were you wearing? He asked. Thinking back to my childhood when I mostly wore jeans, I answered honestly, blue. Oh, I see, William said, as if having a sudden realization. I liked the little girl in the blue princess dress. So I'm sorry. Not long after leaving the Johnsons, I changed my last name to my mom's. In the evening, we walked along the street filled with the sunset's glow, William holding my hand, quietly listening to me recount past events. The person I hated most was not my stepmother. She didn't give birth to me, and ignoring me was just human nature. Actually, I whispered, the person I hate the most is my dad. He let that mother and daughter look down on me and trample on me for his own enjoyment. A pearl is born in an oyster. How many nights of tears it takes, no one cares about. The pain is something only you will ever know. William gently rubbed my hand. Don't think too much about irrelevant people, you have me now. As we walked hand in hand for a while, he suddenly put his arm around my shoulder. Looking up, I subconsciously glanced up, only to see a giant billboard ahead on the pedestrian street. On it was a spinning, colorful mannequin wearing a dazzling necklace around its neck, with a pendant resembling the profile of a woman's face, made up of various colored gems, shining and priceless. The name of the necklace was labeled on the screen, the White's Collection, Colorful Eye. I have turned those precious gems into a necklace for you. While talking, William swiftly snapped a photo of me staring off into the distance. I was puzzled. What are you doing? He gave a slight smile, raising the photo high, capturing the side profile of the pendant from a distance. From the determined monolid to the slightly arched high nose, every detail perfectly matched together. I was amazed. This necklace? How did you recognize me? His fingers gently brushed over my face, tucking my loose hair behind my ear, his voice soft and affectionate. As long as I stand in the light, I'll remember your silhouette. The night had grown late, the cold wind biting, and I suddenly felt a bit cold. I leaned against him, and he held me tightly, leading me forward. I always doubted myself, doubting if I was truly soulless as my stepmother claimed. At this moment, I deeply felt the presence of a soul, shaped profoundly by suffering and shining brightly because of love. And loving someone made it even more tangible. At this moment, the city across the river also embraced the autumn chill, as if all the damp cold were immersed in the mist. Yet as we walked forward, a warmth unexpectedly blossomed in my chest. Finally, I broke free from the haze, chasing after a handful of moonlight pouring down in the wind.